Okay, good morning. Today is the 22nd of Tammuz and the 11th of July. We're up to the third reading of parashat Matot-Massei together. And I just want to point out first a small linguistic thing, which I realize I haven't done this over the past few weeks, but every parsha really is threaded together with one theme, and it's always a little bit of a challenge to figure out what the theme is. But this time it's actually easy. Lynn, can you hear me? Lynn? Can everybody hear me? Okay. So it's a little bit of a challenge to figure out what the theme is, but in this case, the theme is 4 letters. And the 4 letters, or 3 letters actually, are, strangely enough, they have to do with the letters Nun, Kuf, Mem, and Hey. And Nun, Kuf, Mem, and Hey, so we talked about this yesterday, the war against Midian was like a war of revenge. Revenge in Hebrew is nekama. On Sunday, we talked about vows. Now, we didn't see that word in the text. There's no word there that looks like Nun, Kuf, Mem, Hey. But I mentioned on Sunday that there's an entire tractate dedicated to these vows called Nedarim. And the first question that's asked in this tractate, because again, it's all about psychology, and one of the main questions in psychology is, what do you mean when you say X? So the first question there is, when somebody says, I'm making a vow in a different language, and he doesn't even say the word vow fully. He just says part of it. So what is the case then? Is it a vow? Is it not a vow? The word that they use, because that's the language that was spoken in the time of the Talmud, is Aramaic. And how do you say a vow in Aramaic? You say konam. Konam is the same 4 letters, or 3 letters, Kuf, Nun, and Mem, just in a different order. Konam, like nekama. Today's reading begins with the word umikne. Umikne means and livestock. Livestock has exactly the same letters as nekama. So we have this whole thing of these 3 letters coming together, again, in konam, which is a vow, in the nakama, the revenge taken on Midian, and now in the mikne, in the livestock. And the story is like this, and we're going to tie it all together right now. So the story is like this, that the tribes of Reuben and Gad had tremendous amount of livestock, and they looked at the eastern side of the Jordan, where they had already conquered, and they said, this is land for people who have a great deal of livestock. And so they asked Moses to stay there. They actually already prepared their villages and their holding pens for the cattle, and they prepared everything. And then they came to Moses after everything was finished, and they said, "We want to stay here." And Moses thought that they were reenacting the whole story with the spies, that they don't want to go into the land of Israel, and they took great pains to convince him that was not the case, that they were going to leave their cattle and their children there on the eastern side of the Jordan, in these villages that they had built for them, and they themselves, all the men, would cross the Jordan and help the other 10 tribes. At the time, there were 10 tribes. We'll see in a moment what happened, and they would help those 10 tribes conquer the rest of the territory to the west of the Jordan. So Moses in the end agrees to this, and he makes them take, surprisingly enough, a vow, tying us back to the beginning of the parsha. Now, Moses didn't take this well, and the sages also, following his lead, also say that there was something wrong with what they wanted. And they note 2 things. One is, why are you so quick and hasteful and trying to make everything work out for you before everybody else is settled? Maybe the case would be that after you would conquer the rest of the land, then you would come back and you would take this area. By the way, this area was conquered in a great deal by the descendants of Joseph. And the reason is, I think I mentioned this many weeks back, that there were, Joseph had acquired, as the viceroy of Egypt, he had acquired many of these lands with his own money, and they belonged to him. That's why we find that one of his descendants went and reconquered them. But these are many of the lands that later went to Reuben and Gad, and we'll see in a moment someone else. So there's this idea of you're very hasteful, and they even call it a hasteful inheritance. It's called a nachala mevohelet, that there's something wrong with the way that you're doing things. You should do things with a lot more thought and care and so on. And they note something more. They say that when they came to Moses, these two tribes came to Moses and told him they wanted to stay in the eastern side of the Jordan, they said, there is ample grass for our livestock, and we have built cities or villages for our offspring, for our children. And they said, and the sages say, who does it that? What kind of an order is that? You first talk about what's important to you. What's most important to you? Theoretically, what's most important to you is your children. So they should have said first, we built villages for our children, and there is ample room for our livestock. But they preceded their children by the animals. And so again, this is considered to be a mindset of chaos, where you don't think things through completely, and you first act, and then you begin to wonder, okay, can I actually make this work, and how will this work? Now, when you think about it, that is exactly the mindset of somebody who makes a vow, which is why we have to have this ability to annul a vow, because the person didn't think it through. They weren't able to completely think about everything. Obviously, that's the same thing with revenge. Revenge is also something that's done without thinking it through. It's something that happens as a gut reaction. It's something that does happen. It's human nature. There's nothing so mysterious about it. It's just how people are. We're vindictive. That's the way we are. But we're not vindictive from our minds, because if you're vindictive from your mind, it's not revenge anymore. It's just murder or whatever else. But if it's something that happens spontaneously, we understand that this is how human nature is. So on the face of it, we reject all three of these. We reject the vows, we try to annul them, or at least we put a mechanism in place to be able to annul them. We reject the revenge, although we admit that it is part of our human nature. And we also, in a sense, Moses first rejects Reuben and Gad, and their whole very quick to decide and build and commit without even knowing whether Moses is going to agree or not. So on the face of it, again, Judaism especially, which is a religion of the mind, rejects these things. However, we see that in the end Moses does agree to it. We see that in the end a revenge that comes from God is something else. We see that in the end that if the vow was not annulled, it's accepted and it holds. So what is this trying to tell us? What it's really trying to tell us is that there is an innate, call it intuitive wisdom to these decisions that are done without thinking too much, which are done spontaneously. They do have some validity to them. In fact, most of the things that are stable in the world today began by someone who did something chaotically, who did something without thinking about it. Think about all the foods that we eat. Somebody had to be rash enough to actually take one of those berries and try it, not knowing whether it's going to be poisonous or not. They didn't act on knowledge. They didn't act on by thinking. They were hungry, so they ate it spontaneously, without thinking about it. Let's go back even further. When Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and they became conscious of themselves, and they were in the end thrown out of the Garden of Eden, that was a spontaneous act. What Eve did was she didn't think it through. She didn't completely understand what she was doing. And she pursued what her heart told her. When Adam ate from it, he did the same thing. He also didn't think it through. In fact, you could argue that all the sins, in a sense, are spontaneous, in the sense of a person not thinking it through. The sages say that if a person would consider what he's doing and would be aware of it, he would never sin. The only time he sins is when he follows his heart, when he follows this spontaneity, this chaotic sense. So, was it a good thing or a bad thing? So on the one hand, yes, it was bad. All these things are negative. On the other hand, there is a certain aspect of our humanity that we can't dismiss that is actually only available to us through that instinct. And in fact, in Kabbalah we put that instinct, in Chassidut we put that instinct in the crown. We say that even though the word crown in Hebrew, keter, in Aramaic means to wait, to have patience, still keter is above the mind. It's beyond the mind. There is sometimes, not only sometimes, but probably all the time, a certain divinely directed intuition within these acts that happen spontaneously. The problem is that they are chaotic. The problem is that it's very hard to pick up the pieces afterwards. But once a person does tshuva, if it was a sin, once he returns to God, once the acts of Reuben and God, they come to Moses and they say, so what do you say? When these things do happen later, they're fixed, they're rectified, they become a very important part of our humanity. So the fact that Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, we couldn't have been who we are. We could not have received the Torah. We could not have understood the meaning of having inner tension between our good inclination and evil inclination. We couldn't have become who we are without that rash act, without that spontaneity. The sages therefore say, and this is something that requires a lot more discussion than what I can do just now. I'm just grazing the surface, that the Mashiach will come either in a generation that is entirely positive, zakai, meaning that it has all merits, or he will come in a generation that it is all negative in the sense that they are all dismerits. Everything is wrong with it. Why? Because the Mashiach really does represent in the end the ability to take this spontaneity and bring it, the chaos, into some kind of order, and to make something out of it, to show you that your entire past, all those things that you look back on, and you say, all of this I did as a youth, as someone who didn't think about things, I didn't understand what I was doing, and so on and so forth. He helps you do tshuva with this. He helps you put it in the right context. He helps you return to God because of those things that you did wrong. And so, in a certain sense, it's only a generation that is that chaotic that understands the need for the Mashiach, that can really understand why the chaos has to be put back in order. But if you're living a life that is all merit, and you never did anything wrong, you never had spontaneity, you never did anything rash, you never went overboard, you don't know what chaos is, you could think that you could live forever and ever and everything will be fine. And in a certain sense, most Jews think that that's how they live, that everything's fine. I keep Torah, I keep Shabbos, I keep all the commandments, everything is perfectly fine. You know, Mashiach, I don't need you right now. I don't need you at all. But the person who has lowliness and who understands that really his entire youth, if not up until this moment when I came on late, is all spontaneous, it's all rash, it's all a mess still. Only the person who understands that feels that there is rashness in their life, that not everything is in order, only that person can come to God and demand and say, we need Mashiach, we need something to put things in the right order. And in that sense, spontaneity has a real place. So even though we don't take revenge, but if a person went and did it, so they need more than anyone else this idea of rectifying the world. They want to set things straight. They understand the problem. when they make a vow that they can't keep, they understand their weakness, they understand why they need help from above. So in that sense, our spontaneity really is our crown. It's almost like a demonstration of the fact that we need something higher than our intellect in order to set the record straight, in order to bring prosperity and peace and the rule of order into our lives.
Amen.